Here we go. Okay, shalom everybody, and we're on our unbelievable. This is already our 12th session. I don't think I've ever given a series as long as this in my life. As usual, we'll do recap. We're actually on the halfway mark now because the Kaf and Lamit are the two middle letters of the alphabet. And again, we'll do it briefly, not going into the detail because we've done it so many times. Aleph to Hey is the process of influence from Hashem, the Aleph through the Bet, which is the Kli, two of them together, making a Gimel, Gomel, the perfect giver, giving to the Dalet, the Dal, downtrodden, and the two of them together become the Hey, right? This world with the Yud inside. And then we had a series of, I'm not happy the way I did it here, should be just Vav Zayin Chet. And that series is the process of spreading the koach, throughout the world, starting with the Vav, which is disseminating the goodness in the physical world, and therefore Vav is 6. Just going to pause the recording for a second. So Vav is the physical dissemination of the goodness, because there's 6 directions, there's 6 days of the physical week. Zayin is adding the spiritual dimension inside the physical world. So it's the 7th day of Shabbos, which is still part of the real world, but more of a spiritual look side of it, or the point that brings, the 7th point that brings the 6 directions together. And Chet is when we go above nature. Okay, and then Tet and Yud are the two numbers, the two big numbers. And the difference between the Tet and Yud is that the Tet, each number does its own thing. Each is separate, each is finding his own unique way, not really coordinated with the other people or the other forces. And Yud, on the other hand, everybody comes together, all the forces come together and work as a team. Okay, Tzvi's boys are all soccer players. One of the examples I brought is when I played soccer in 1st grade, we were like the Tet, that everybody was running and doing their own thing. When the boys play soccer, I think they're like the Yud, where they're working as a team. And we said that you have to first go through that stage. First, you have to give each person or each quality its individual development, so we know what we're talking about. And then only afterwards you bring the pieces together. If you try to change the order, the intrinsic value of each and every separate piece will be watered down, will be diluted. And then last week, finally, we spoke about the Kaf. Now, I wrote here that Yud and Kaf, and this is true for all the letters from now onwards, are in the public realm. Okay, we see a similarity between Aleph, which is 1, and Yud, which is 10. In a similar fashion, we saw similarity between the Bet and the Kaf. Okay, both the Aleph and the Yud symbolize Hashem, because both of them are, Aleph is Elohim, Yud is Hashem's name. But the difference is that when you're coming to 10, you're talking about Hashem in the public realm. Therefore, we have a minyan for mentioning Hashem's name when you have 10 people together. Similarly, Bet is a vessel. It's shaped like a vessel, but that's on an individual basis. That's why the number is only 2. But when we talk about Kaf and the number is 20, then we're already going to the public realm, and we're talking about how you bring a group together, a group of spiritual forces together in one vessel. And we spoke also about the Kaf of the palm of the hand and all the different types of kapot, Kaf, that they are. Okay, and anybody who wants more detail is welcome to go back to last week's recording. So now we're going to move on to the next letter, which is a very interesting letter, the Lamit. In fact, the tallest letter of all the letters of the alphabet. And that makes it quite unique. So first of all, the name Lamed, Lamed means to learn, also to teach, right? Le-Lamed is to cause somebody else to learn. So that is to teach. That is true with, as we know, with a lot of the verbs in Hebrew. If you just change the format, it can be changed from doing the action to being causative, to causing somebody else to do the action, to do the action. Lilbosh is to get dressed. Lehitlabesh is to dress yourself. Aval lahalbish is to dress somebody else. So the word lamed could mean either to teach or to learn. The numerical value of number is 30. And remember that 3, when we spoke about the gimel, was balance. That's what the gomel. So 30 is balance, again, the number 3, but in a public realm. The same principle that we said about 10 and 20. Yud and Kaf. And the word Lamed, similar to what we said about Kaf and Bet, sometimes you can change a word and replace it with Aleph, right? The word El, to go towards something, is you can also write as the single letter Lamed. Ani holech el habayit, going to the house, or ani holech labayit. Here you have a single letter that could mean a proper word, a whole word. And that's what I'm saying. The sound could mean towards. It could also mean like, similarly. Okay, hu domeh la'ach shelo. He looks like his brother. La, hu domeh la. So the word, the sound la could also mean to have a similarity. Okay, like as in similarity. In fact, I'm going to change it because like could be a bit ambiguous. So I'll write the word similar. Okay, and it can also be for, right? You do something for somebody else. Okay, ani kaniti etze lo, like bishvilo, for him. And I just what I wrote in brackets is so very interesting that the Gemara says when you tell someone to go in peace, and we like to say that in English also, but you must say lech leshalom and not lech beshalom. Lech beshalom we say at a funeral. That's the way we depart from the deceased, because the letter B lacks movement. You are where you are. You're in the place. Go in peace. But when we bless a living person, we say lech leshalom. May you keep moving towards peace, because that's the difference between a living person and a dead person. A living person is still moving, still growing, and that's why he's lech leshalom. And there we have the same example, special example of le. Moving on to the shape of the okay, here I've got a mistake. Okay, no, I haven't got a mistake. The shape of the Lamed is actually a combination of 2 letters. Okay, it has over here a kaf on the bottom, like the letter kaf that we just left, and on the top a vav. So it's almost like 2 letters joined together. And the numerical value of kaf is 20 and of vav is 6. Together it spells 26, which is Hashem's name, right? If you do the calculation of Yud, Hey, and a Vav and a Hey, Yud is 10, Hey is 5, Vav is 6, and Hey is 5 again. You add them together, you get 26, telling us that the ultimate teacher is not here the bank, but is Hashem. And we see connecting, there's this thick line here that sort of connects the upper and lower parts, connecting the Vav and the Kaf. So on one hand, this line serves 2 purposes. On one hand, it's a clear separation. You can see on the right-hand side below is the Kaf, on the left-hand side above is the Vav. On the other hand, it's also joins. Okay, so similar to what we said about the Vav in the letter Aleph, where it's separated and also joined the 2 Yuds. So we have this this line in the Lamit. Now, there's to be a teacher, a proper teacher. Okay, if I remind you that when we learned about Aleph, way back in the beginning, we said the word Aleph also means to teach or to train. But the difference with the Lamed is that it's so tall. And by being tall, it's two things. Number one, you have authority. They say that people, psychologically, people who are tall have an easier time controlling and influencing other people, just because their physical height often makes other people assume that they're interesting people and they should be listened to. But it does something else. It allows the person to look at things from above. And we know that when you look at things from above, you get a more broader view. You get to what we call a bird's eye view. And that gives you a more of a global understanding. So as opposed to the Aleph, the Lamit, the teaching in Lamit, again, it's appropriate for the tens. That's why it's here in the middle of the alphabet. Gives you an understanding of not just one specific idea, but how this whole structure fits in together. And the first word in Torah that starts with the letter Lamit is also in Beraishit, in the 5th verse. Vayikra Elohim la'or yom v'lachoshech kara laila va'erev vayvoker yom echad. And the truth is, I wrote here in the first creation, but it's also true for all the subsequent creations. But here we see that the le is towards. Okay, in other words, the Lamed is taking us towards something to understand it better. So how do we bring all these ideas together into one global idea? The idea of the Lamit, okay, and I think let's start from the pasuk that we just said. It's not actually talking about the light itself. In the verse prior to this, Hashem already created the light. Here it's telling us how to relate to the light. Vayikra Elohim la'or yom. Hashem called the light, or literally called to the light, day. In other words, when we learn something, we're not physically using it, but we're trying to understand what is our interaction, what is our relationship to that thing. And that is why the Lamed, that's why the letter Lamed to teach comes dafka with the number 30. In other words, to really understand something, to get the balanced picture that we spoke about, you need the number 3. Okay, reminding you, when we spoke about Gimel, we said the two extremes are the Aleph and the Bet, the light and the house, the spiritual, the physical, and the Gimel is the balance between them. In a similar fashion, the Yud is the light, the Kaf is the Kli, or the house, right? The vessel, physical, the spiritual and the physical, and the Lamed is the teacher. How do I take this? How do I teach others, or teach myself, to make sure that we have the right relationship to what we're relating to? And in order to have the right relationship, we don't just balance between the left and the right, or the extremes. We actually take a step up, and we have this bird's eye view, and that's what gives us the authority, right? There's the saying in Hebrew, mishichmo lamala, literally from his shoulders upwards, somebody that's tall and shows authority, not just because he's physically tall, because it gives us a hint that this person understands things. Okay, when we say somebody is a great person, I remember when Rav Goren, the late Rav Goren, many years ago, came to South Africa. He was really a great man, but a very short man physically. And one of the men there in South Africa said, you know what? He's a small man, but he's a great man. And that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about not something small. We're talking about something that's large, but large not just physically large, but large from a spiritual sense, that you understand how to relate la'or, to the light, how to bring this whole balance together. So we're going to move on to other interesting facts. Those are the 5 qualities. Now we're going to move to other interesting facts like we normally do, relating to the letter Lamed. And first we'll start as I've always done so far is the Gemara in Masechet Shabbat. It talks about the little children that gave drashot on the letters. And after, in the beginning, it says that if you know how to gomel dalim and do the right thing that you're meant to do, a whole lot of good things will happen. And we saw these through the letters, Hey, Vav, Zayin, etc. And eventually it gets to the kaf last week. Hashem will give you a keter, a crown, le'olam. Okay, the Lamit is le'olam. In other words, this is eternity. Because the Lamit, if you got the bird's eye view and you look at things on a broader value, you also bring time, past, present, and future, together into one total understanding. And that is, again, relates to the Lamit, not being able, so to speak, to lift up your head, not just to look left and right, but to look forward and backwards in time and bring time together. Okay, to be able to look in history, to be able to maybe learn the book of the Shoftim, of the prophets, and then look at the modern history of Israel, and you get an understanding that far deeper, far more broad, far broader than if you had looked at just the past or just the present, future separately. The Midrash of Rabbi Akiva that we have mentioned a few times before, he says that the word Lamed actually stands for Lev Mevin Da'at, right? Lamed Mem Dalet is Lev Mevin Da'at, that the heart understands knowledge. And this is a very, very interesting insight. You know, very, very often we think that there's two parts to a person. Sometimes we call it the right brain and the left brain, or the mind and the heart. Men are very advanced in their logic, and women are very advanced in their emotions. But the truth is, these are two parts of both men and women and all people, and the real wisdom is to bring them together. If you really want to have knowledge, wisdom, the word da'at also means connection, right? If you really want, you have to connect your understanding with your emotions. You've got to realize that the person is one complete unit. We're not just a computer, and we're not just an emotional cushion. We're something that blends the two together, and that makes us unique. And that's the Lamed, right? The Lamed that we said brings everything together because it's tall and because it's the number 3. It understands that the Binah from the Mevin comes together with the Lev, and the combination of the two gives you Da'at, gives you the ultimate knowledge. So that's a very deep understanding from Rabbi Akiva. We've said that this letter is the center of the alphabet. It's actually, technically, it's hard to talk about the center of the alphabet because there's 22 letters in the alphabet, which means there's no center because it's an even number. But the Kaf and Lamed together are the center letters. And as one of the center letters, it's in the middle, just like the heart is the center of the body, right? And it's interesting that the word heart, so Lev, also begins with the word Lamed. Okay? The first occurrence of the verb Lamed, right? Above, we spoke about the first time the letter Lamed appeared in the beginning of the word. That's right in Berashit. But the first time that the Torah uses the word Lamed is actually in the book of Dvarim. It's actually in the 5th book, the last book of the Torah. And the last book of the Torah is different from all the other books. Dvarim talks about the whole process from creation through the first 20 generations, and then the fathers Abraham, Isaac, and Yaakov, the world starting up, so to speak, the kicking off, the initiation of the world. Shmot talks about the creation of the tribe, the nation of Israel in the Egyptian experience, which follows on. Okay, if Berashit talks about the mankind as a whole, humanity, even though you have the initial, the fathers, you don't have a Jewish nation. Here we have the development of the Jewish nation, which takes over the spiritual leadership of the Jewish people. Vayikra talks to the subset of the Jewish people, the Kohanim, and how they do the ultimate worship of Hashem. So we're actually going from the broadest to all of mankind, to the subset, the Jewish people, to the subset, the Kohanim, what they do in the temple. And then Bamidbar is the process of how we developed in the 40 years in the desert till we were ready to come to Israel. Now we're ready. Now that that's finished, the first 4 books of the Torah is actually prepared us. And then we have a 5th book. And the 5th book is different to all other books, or all the other 4 books. The 5th book, first of all, takes place not over 2,000 years like the first book of Berashit, not even 200 years like the second book of Shemot. It takes place over 6 weeks, where Moshe is just giving a speech to Am Yisrael, and he repeats a lot of everything that's already been said in the Torah. In fact, the second name of Dvarim is Mishneh Torah, the repetition of the Torah, like the word Sheni, Mishneh Torah. And why is this significant? Why am I spending so much time explaining to it? Because that's where the word Lamit comes in. The Lamit, as we explained before, is learning with perspective. And Dafka, at the end of the process, that's when you can understand the perspective. Dafka, 4 books of the Torah, we don't have the word Lamit. After we've gone through everything, and now we're summing up and looking at the whole process from the beginning to the end with the Lamit's bird's eye view, then we have the first example, the first usage of the word Lamit in the Torah. A special Lamit appears also in the book of Dvarim in the word Vayashlichem. Okay, you can see it's written over here, Vayish, and then the Lamit is a big Lamit. You can see it's bigger than all the other letters. And this comes to teach us that the Lamit, the ultimate Lamit, that will give us thing, right? The word here, Vayesh Lichem, Yesh Lachem, and you'll have, okay, it has to come not from our personal teacher, and not from the great rabbis, and not from Moshe, but the ultimate teacher, which is Hashem. And that's the hint that this is the Lamit, right? The big Lamit. Now, if we mention that the Lamit is the biggest letter in the Torah, the smallest letter of the Torah we learned about 2 weeks ago is the Yud. And the combination of the biggest letter of the Torah, symbolizing Hashem as the ultimate force, and the smallest letter of the Torah as Am Yisrael being the most modest of the people, and realizing our relative smallness to Hashem, that creates the relationship between us and Hashem, and together forms the word Li. Vitem li sgula mikol ha'amim. Hashem says that you, the Jewish people, will be a special, almost like a jewel to me, compared to all the other nations. And what makes us special? Our ability to realize how small we are compared to God's greatness and create that link. And those 2 letters together make the word Li. And it's interesting that those 2 letters are in the beginning and the end of the word Yisrael, again, providing the same message. And the final thing I want to share, it looks like a long slide, but it's only 1 point. It's well known that in the book of Kohelet, Ecclesiastes, that Shlomo HaMelech wrote, he talks about 29 different times. A time for giving birth, and a time for dying, a time to plant, and a time to uproot. And I've copied those few verses over here with the translation. Okay, a season for everything, a time for every experience under heaven, a time for being born, a time for dying, a time, etc., etc. Right? Et laledet, et lamut. What's very interesting that the Gaon of Vilna notices that all of these have a Lamed in the front. I started painting them blue, and I ran out of koach in the middle. But you see, 8 laledet, right? And this is the Lamed that we spoke about in the beginning. The time to give birth, a time lamut, to die, a time to plant. And so for all of them, with 2 exceptions. It doesn't say 8 lispot, and doesn't say 8 lirkot. Support is to eulogize. Here it says weeping, and a more accurate translation would be to eulogize. And record is to dance. Okay, it says wailing here. Okay, so in these 2 cases, the Lamed is missing. And the Gaon of Vilna says this actually teaches us hints to a principle that's mentioned in the Gemara that I've quoted here in Hebrew, that Talmud Torah, learning Torah, is so important that it overrides everything else. a person's got to work a little bit less, and you have to work, but you have to work what you need to work and spend time learning Torah. If you need to plant, spend time planting, but make sure that don't let it clash with the Torah. But there are two exceptions. The one is for a funeral and the other is for a wedding. These two are so important that the Torah says that don't cancel Torah. And the Gaon of Vilna says that's what's hinted where Shlomo HaMelech in his wisdom left out the two Lamits before eulogizing. The word hesped in modern Hebrew comes from sport, and rokod before dancing at a wedding, because even if you've got your standard chevruta, you've even got a session on the letters with Yehuda, and a wedding comes, or God forbid a funeral comes, you skip and you go to these places. And this teaches us that the Lamit, the teaching, the Torah, is missing in just in these two letters out of all of them. So I thought that was a very lovely message that is from the Gaon of Vilna that I didn't know before. I saw the first time when I was preparing the shiur. So briefly, we'll just go back to the 5 main qualities and summarize them together. The Lamit is to teach or to learn. It's a special teacher because the number is 30, which is balance in the public realm. And therefore, he's got the balance. He can see left, right, in the middle. But public, he can see time, past, present, future. He's the tallest letter looking at all directions. The letter brings us towards, keeps us moving and growing. That's the lech leshalom, always bring us towards something, looking for a similarity to something good, trying to do something to achieve something else. All these meanings, or the letter le, are part of the growth that comes, especially with the letter Lamit. The combination is the kaf, the kli. Maybe I didn't explain this enough, but on top of the kli, we have the vav. That's the pipe that makes sure that the kli keeps getting filled up. And the two of them together have the numerical value of Hashem. Okay? Gives us the tall letter, the bird's eye view. And because we're tall, we're always striving for greatness. Yeah, I added a point that I didn't emphasize before, that the Lamit always reaches to the top, but when it reaches, it still remains connected to the bottom part. He tries to raise up the rest of the letters with him. And all this is to help us understand the or, bring us towards what is the or, and that is the ultimate teaching. So thank you, everybody. Any questions before I turn off the recording? And so let's all take this Lamit that we'll teach ourselves of what we should be teaching, and hopefully we'll all get to a better place.